Bloodborne has easily become one of my favorite games from the 2 short weeks I've been playing. The atmosphere and aesthetics of Bloodborne are alluring and fascinating, absorbing you into the environment from Fishing Hamlet to Cainhurst Castle. And the lore/story of Bloodborne is truly fascinating that makes me enjoy the areas and bosses of this game even more. And when it comes to the bosses, Bloodborne provides a plethora of downright phenomenal, intense battles that have been the best I have faced in my video game history. The lore, designs, themes, and difficulty of these fights have been the best part of my Bloodborne experience, and I wanted to share what makes these bosses memorable with you guys. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Josh, also known as Gascoigne, and I hope you enjoy my top 10 favorite bosses in Bloodborne.
Dear oh dear, what was it? The hunt, the blood, or the horrible dream?
Fear the old blood.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
My first time walking into the cathedral where you find the Bloodstar Beast, I was ecstatic to fight it because this boss is found, in my personal opinion, one of the best areas in Bloodborne that's filled with so much interesting lore. Because I like story games, after I completed an area in Bloodborne, I would stop playing for a bit and look up the lore about the place I just went through, and it made the experience 10 times better and a lot less confusing. I have to say that the reason the Bloodstar Beast is number 9 on my list is because of this 70-30% ratio. The 30% being the fight itself, and the 70% being the lore behind this beast and Old Yharnam. The idea of fighting a bloody beast in an abandoned cathedral within a ghost town seems so fascinating to me. I don't know why, but it just is. And the lore explains why Old Yharnam was left behind, and I'm going to explain it, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. There was a mysterious plague that was spreading around Old Yharnam known as the Ash and Blood illness, with poison-like properties that had no cure. And the only treatment that they had were these pills that only basically delayed death. The residents of Old Yharnam were desperate and turned to the blood provided by the Healing Church because it is well known that this blood had healing-like properties. However, the events of this forsaken town would only get worse as the blood of the Healing Church transformed citizens into ferocious beasts. And this new illness became known as Scourge of the Beast. Early treatments for this illness were known as bloodletting, where victims would have blood removed from their body in the hopes of removing the tainted blood, practiced in forms of slitting the wrists and ankles. We can see a horde of these monsters within an old cathedral worshipping a crucified beast with marks on its wrists dangling dead over a puddle of blood. Considering this treatment was a failure, and with no other option as the hunters were being overwhelmed by the amount of monsters in Old Yharnam, it was burned and deserted. Any contact from Old Yharnam was dismissed, and anyone trying to escape would be killed immediately. End of story. When it comes to the Bloodstar Beast, there was a religion revolving around the chalices that the Healing Church brought into the town. So those who were leaders in the religion had the most access to the blood, which made them into bigger, stronger, and more hideous beasts. So I think it's safe to assume that the Bloodstar Beast was a leader in this religion of the Chalice and Healing Church. Within my few weeks of playing Bloodborne consistently, when I wasn't playing the game, I was reading up on the lore, and anything that revolved around the Healing Church piqued my interest, especially Old Yharnam. One of my favorite types of imagery is religious imagery, and Old Yharnam is filled with an ample amount of that type of imagery. The most fascinating and best part for me, like I mentioned earlier, is the beasts worshipping what seems to be a dead, blood-starved beast. I just love the entire backstory about this place. It really does intrigue me, and I'm completely absorbed into Bloodborne and its world when I'm in Old Yharnam. When I arrived at the Cathedral of the Bloodstar Beast, I expected a tough fight, but this boss really tested my skills for the first time through. She's very aggressive, which after fighting Gascoigne, I was used to. But as I dwindled down her health, she started to expel toxins from her body, and every attack she did would have a poison side effect. I luckily had many antidotes, so it wasn't much trouble keeping the poison at bay. It was finding a chance to use the antidotes in the first place and to heal as well. Combined with her flailing skin flaps that, no joke, honestly distracted me a lot. It was really difficult to react to her attacks because I didn't know what she was doing or what combo she was about to do, because her skin flaps, they would just flap around and I couldn't see what she was doing. Fortunately, she can be parried. So, around my 4th attempt, I had a steady rhythm going between dodging, parrying, and attacking. See, a lot of bosses in this game, I've noticed, have a pattern that you need to understand. And once you do understand those patterns, the bosses become much easier to handle and a lot more fun to fight. And the Bloodstar Beast is no different. When compared to Father Gascoigne, she's mild at first, but it's her second phase, around 50%, where she has the same type of aggression as regular Gascoigne, and when she enters phase 3, she's around the same aggression as Beast Gascoigne, but because she's smaller, it's more dangerous. And with her poisonous effects added on, it becomes a hit and run sort of tactic because, from my experience, you do not want to stick close to her for a long time because of the poison. It was hard to say goodbye to old Yharnam and this poor victim of both the Ashen Blood and Scourge of the Beast illness, but the Bloodstar Beast and its story certainly left an impression on me that made me even more excited for the rest of my experience in Bloodborne.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Father Gascoigne, the foreign hunter who succumbed to his bloodlust, losing himself to the hunt. This was truly the first obstacle I faced in Bloodborne on my first run. And keep in mind, he's only the second boss. Cleric Beast was extremely basic and fairly easy, at least for me it was, but Father Gascoigne raises the scale on multiple levels. His aggressive nature forced me to become adept at dodging and allowed me to learn about parrying, which is fairly simple with Father Gascoigne and extremely useful for the rest of the game. His multitude of harsh combos and strong attacks makes Father a formidable foe, and the entire fight requires full concentration. He switches in between the axe version and the halberd version of his weapon, the hunter axe, and once you take him down to around 50%, 35%, around that range, he will lose all restraints and transform into the beast he was inevitably becoming. Now, this is where I and many other players struggled the most because not only does he change his moveset completely so I'm not used to it, but he's even more aggressive with fast combos that do an absurd amount of damage, not to mention that he can break all the cover that you were using before to avoid his attacks, leaving you face to face with a true beast. Guys, he's the second boss. He shouldn't be this complex, but it does play into his favor because his complexity is what made him number 10 on my list, and let me explain. Compared to other bosses, this fight was so much more of a rush, and I felt like my skills were improving when I defeated him for the first time. I really enjoyed this fight because of the intense nature of it. It has you nervous and dancing on your toes consistently, and yeah, that applies to every single boss in Bloodborne. Almost every single boss. But Father Gascoigne goes about it a certain way that I'm attracted to. Like I said earlier, Father is on the verge of becoming a beast, so his attacks are not smooth and have no grace behind it, giving him a ferocious feel to his assaults. Considering he is the second boss of the entire game, it really sets the standard for how tough the enemies are that lie ahead. But his arena does provide a bit of a handicap since this is early game. So if you need time to heal, creating distance can be pretty easy by hiding behind a clump of tombs where he can't reach you. This environment, along with an intense opponent, makes for an epic battle of who is the better hunter. And Father Gascoigne was a really good hunter before he was consumed by his desire of the blood. The lore goes on to tell that he was out hunting one night and didn't return home, and so his wife Viola went to go search for him, but forgot the music box. And so there's two theories. One is that because he couldn't recognize her, he actually killed his own wife, or when she did go to look for him, some other beasts killed her, and that's what made him go insane. The lore behind Father Gascoigne makes me feel really bad for him, like he couldn't do anything to alter his situation, a victim of the disease known as Scourge of the Beast. And seeing Viola's corpse on a roof nearby reminds us of how brutal the disease is, whether it was him or another infected person that killed her. Combined with an intense fight early game that prepares the player for Bloodborne at its fullest, Father Gascoigne is an excellent boss that lands him here at number 9.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Vicar Emilia. As the last Vicar of the Healing Church, seeing all the other Vicars and members fall ill to the Scourge of the Beast, it's understandable that the only thing Vicar Emilia can do at this point is pray. I mean, I would too. The cutscene prior to fighting her for the first time was really gruesome and kind of sad because you know that this boss just seconds ago was a human struggling to resist becoming a beast herself, still clutching her golden pendant, even during the fight. But on the other hand, she provides a very entertaining fight, so I guess it's okay. First time playing through, I really struggled with her because my initial strategy was to stick close to her sides and behind so that she couldn't reach me, like I did with the Cleric Beast. However, she did prove to be more agile and a heavy hitter that punished every other mistake I made. Turns out, I actually had a good strategy, I just didn't go about it correctly because I play very aggressive, and greed is a big problem of mine personally, so I would still be hitting her even if I was directly in front of her. And on top of that, she has certain attacks where she will scratch the ground next to her, which would hit me, and I would get caught in the middle of a dangerous combo. I had to be patient with her, which I was very bad at, considering I'm just naturally an impatient person, and that she has the ability to heal herself. I can't tell you how many times I got whacked in the face because I was just so worried about her backing up and trying to heal. I would just try to get in as much damage as possible, but the one thing that Vicar Emilia did teach me was to be patient. I played very carefully in my successful run, and when I did stagger her, that's when I let my greed feast, and once she was up, I had to stay in good position at all times. It felt really good my first time taking down Vicar Emilia since she was really tough for me personally. And come on, anytime you defeat a large monster, it just feels good. Now, something I do want to mention that I haven't mentioned before is the music to this fight. I love the soundtracks of Bloodborne. They are really good. I would have to say probably my favorite gaming soundtracks ever, at least with my experience. For example, Father Gascoigne is very intense and wildlike, which really relates to his character. Vicar Emilia's theme, from my perspective, has this tension and sense of despair. As the last Vicar of the Healing Church, there's no hope for the church to continue as the beasts take over Yharnam and the Cathedral Ward, finally infecting the last member. Combined with her constant shrieking, it really does add to the tension of the fight. And I don't know why, but I feel like I have to point this out. I love how at some points in the fight, she will have these blue highlights all over her body as the moonlight hits her just right, and for me, it really emphasizes her design. And as someone who is Egyptian, okay, fighting a mummified wolf creature automatically makes me like her. A great fight, good lore, unique design, and intense, awesome music lands Vicar Emilia at number 8 on my list.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Walking through the Forbidden Woods with an entire population of snakes, whether in clumps, big clumps, or infested within a human body, I expected the boss to be a snake, obviously. Seeing the shadows of Yharnam appear from the darkness was not only really cool, but a pleasant surprise. The simplicity of their designs I can appreciate, and the atmosphere of the Forbidden Grave along with the music in the background makes for an eerie atmosphere that I actually really enjoy. I mentioned in my previous top 10, my top 10 monsters for Monster Hunter, that I like the more dark and sinister things in video games, which is why I like the Shadows and Bloodborne, just in general. After the initial jolt of excitement, I proceeded to take on all 3 shadows at once, and I actually successfully beat them on my second try, the first try being really close as well. I honestly was a bit disappointed, I'm not gonna lie, as I expected 3 bosses to be teeth-grindingly difficult, but not really. At least, that's what I thought. It was not until my new game and my new game plus cycle where the shadows showed their true potential. They hit like a bus on both cycles, and with the 3 of them seemingly being more cooperative somehow, I actually really struggled with crowd control. My strategy was to take down the Katana Shadow first, since he has the most health, and I would consider him being the most dangerous, but the problem I usually had was the Fire Breather was a clingy girlfriend to the Katana Shadow, therefore spraying fire at me every few seconds and flailing his blade at me as well. The mage would just stay far away, shooting fireballs that would home in on me or drop them from the sky and making 3 explosions, which was really annoying for me. But I had this mindset of, this is going to be a really annoying fight. So my mentality was in the right place and I was prepared to be patient with the shadows. This fight can be pretty easy considering you can stun lock and parry them, but the real problem occurs when you bring one of the shadows down to around 40%. All 3 will give birth to snakes alien isolation style from their chest and gain new attacks and additional damage. And on top of that, if you kill one of the shadows, the other 2 are able to summon huge snakes that will decimate your health, regardless of how much vitality you have. I actually think it's a really nice addition to the shadows. The huge snakes are not something you can simply tank the hits from. You have to be smart and either dodge well or run away so that they can't reach you. The shadows of Yharnam require good control of all 3 shadows, and you have to keep your eye on where they are, otherwise you can be surprised and easily get gang raped by all 3. But it does get better as the fight continues because once you defeat one shadow, the other 2 are a lot easier to manage, and then once you just have one, it's pretty much game over. But even so, in the second phase, they do become 5 times deadlier, especially the Katana Shadow, because he gains a new ranged attack that's just ridiculous when tracking you. But otherwise, this fight can be a lot of fun. And once I defeated all 3 shadows, I felt like a champion, awaiting the next challenge ahead.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Now this is where my true favorites of Bloodborne start. I love the other 4 bosses I mentioned, don't get me wrong, but these next 6 are where I think Bloodborne is truly at its prime. And what a better way to kick things off than with Martyr Logarius, the boss of Cainhurst Castle. Honestly, one of the creepiest areas in Bloodborne for me, mainly because of the absurd amount of paranormal activity and constant crying, but regardless is a unique and beautiful area in Bloodborne that unfortunately is only optional. Anyways, as the leader of the executioners who were tasked with exterminating the vile bloods of Cainhurst, Master Logarius is no easy task. He has multiple spells up his arsenal that deal a great amount of damage and can punish the greedy if not kept in check. Even after fighting him multiple times, his evil spirit bomb still gets me occasionally, and I always back up to make space and then I get hit by the bomb again. His wave of skulls is not super hard to dodge, but if I don't expect it or if I just dodge terribly, the wave hits me and it hits hard. The exploding skull is always nerve-wracking since he does it so quick and he uses it to create space, allowing him time to use more spells, and then I can't reach him. Logarius is one of the few bosses in this game that uses magic, and his form of magic is very sinister that I personally enjoy seeing in action. It gives off a sense of, how do I say this, ruthlessness and legendary power. On top of all the magic he can use, there is the melee attacks Logarius has. You would think sitting in a chair for however long would make him sluggish and weak, but not so. For in his second phase, he becomes physically aggressive, switching from magic attacks to constant melee assaults, which, from my perspective, is actually a bit easier since he can be parried. However, there is one attack that did give me some trouble my first couple of runs. He will grab his sword, stab it into the ground, and a cloud of knives will appear above the sword and constantly track down the hunter. After not disappearing for around 5 minutes, I thought this move was overpowered. until I realized that you can shoot the sword in the ground and destroy it, which honestly is a bit disappointing since that move is now completely useless once you know how to deal with it. Regardless, the fight with Martyr Logarius is extremely difficult. With the powerful spells in the first phase and the constant assault in the second, it can be easy to die from 1 to 2 hits if you're not careful, and I certainly wasn't in many occasions. However, I do enjoy the difficulty because it just raises the amount of satisfaction given once he's defeated, and the variety that Logarius provides keeps the fight fresh and enjoyable. The Bloodstar Beast, for example, has 3 phases, but it's simply adding more poison and becoming more aggressive. It's not anything special. Martyr Logarius is not as aggressive as other bosses may be in the first phase, but the spells he conjures up are truly fatal, and he makes up for the aggression in the second phase with the constant pressure of melee attacks. See, what I really like about Logarius is that he provides both spell and melee attacks that a lot of bosses don't have. The only one that I can think of on the top of my head is Mikulesh, but we don't talk about Mikulesh. And I have to say, what an epic design. An old skeleton guy in huge robes that carries a freaking scythe and a blade in both hands. I usually have favoritism towards the beasts in Bloodborne, but Martyr Logarius really surprised me and I absolutely loved the design. At first glance, I thought he was the king of Cainhurst Castle. I see a crown, I think king. But it's a little bit more complex than that. Once the executioners defeated all the vile bloods of Cainhurst, it turns out that the queen, which was the primary reason they were there, was immortal. So Logarius took it upon himself to guard the queen for eternity, driving off all those who would dare come close to her. And fighting him on top of the roof of Cainhurst outside of the room he's guarding, like, that is an arena if I've ever seen one. One of my favorite boss arenas in this game, without a doubt. I like the juxtaposition of the quiet atmosphere, it's snowing and peaceful, and the adrenaline rush of fighting Master Logarius. Also, fun fact, because I didn't know this until I was writing the script, a martyr is someone who basically dies for religious beliefs. And Martyr Logarius basically imprisons himself, guarding the queen forever, crowning himself a martyr, essentially. Martyr Logarius is a religious man, dying for a cause he thinks worthy enough, and fighting him, dodging his spells, and going toe-to-toe with a blade and scythe in hand is what I call a true boss fight.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt.
This was a wonderful fight from the beginning to the end. Gehrman is a character that helps you on your journey in the Hunter's Dream, and seeing him rise to face me for the first time was exhilarating. It's interesting because you would think a boss arena would be something dangerous or dark like the Shadows or Father Gascoigne, but the complete contrast with Gehrman works so well. Fighting the old coot in a field of flowers with a burning house in the background under a full moon? Are you kidding me? That is such a gorgeous arena, and is my favorite in this game, period. Nothing can top it. And it's also funny because while this fight is stressful at some points, the arena and the atmosphere makes it seem so serene and tranquil, the opposite I would expect in a boss fight, especially from Bloodborne. I felt so calm to face him, like I was able to take him on my first try. Of course, that didn't happen. My first time running through, he was difficult because I didn't know what moves and combos he had, but once I figured it out, it was a lot of fun to fight him to surpass the quote-unquote teacher in skill. Bloodborne up to this point prepares you very well for the final boss in the game where it wasn't really difficult, but it wasn't easy. It had a perfect middle ground that made me not only enjoy the fight, but the music and the scenery as well. And that's what Gehrman does so perfectly. With other bosses, I'm determined on beating them to the point where I almost ignore the music or the atmosphere, like the one Reborn, for example. He's not hard at all, but all I wanted to do was to get rid of the bell ladies and smack the fleshy foot thing, whatever it is. However, Gehrman is a perfect balance, and I really wanted the fight to play throughout, and luckily, it does. And I like how this fight takes place in the Hunter's Dream, where you upgrade, buy items, and strengthen your character. Not to mention, this is where he is the entire time. During my first playthrough, I always wondered what awaited me beyond this gate, and realizing that this is where the final boss takes place was astonishing to find out. And like I said, he's not a pushover. Even though Gehrman is at an advanced age, sluggish is the last thing I would use to describe him. He fights like the other hunter bosses in the sense that he has his own weapon, which he will switch multiple times between the two forms, but unlike the others, Gehrman is not as predictable. He can switch between both forms of the burial blade whenever he feels like it, and as he grows stronger in the third phase, staggering him is a lot harder, though you can still parry whenever you feel like it. After a couple of tries, I took him down, which was really satisfying, but it wasn't exactly a happy ending because of our desire for the blood or the monsters or the dream, whatever the case may be. Gehrman was actually trying to help us escape the hunter's nightmare. But because of our hunter's corruption, we, in a sense, rebelled against the first hunter and took his place, forever trapped in the hunter's dream. It's a very different ending to a video game that I've experienced, but with a game like Bloodborne, I really didn't know what to expect. However, I didn't mind it. I liked the ending a lot. Overall, Gehrman is a wonderful fight, with a blissful nature in his music and atmosphere that gives me the best of what Bloodborne has to offer.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Fear the old blood.
By the gods, fear it, Lawrence.
Lawrence, the first Vicar, the one who pushed forward to become like the Great Ones with ambition and founded the Healing Church. Unfortunately, this ambition and the use of the tainted, deadly old blood would transform Lawrence into the first of many cleric beasts. There's something that you should know about me, and it's that when I come across something I get stuck on, whether it's a question on my homework or a puzzling predicament, whatever the case may be, I will not give up until I figure out a solution or complete a specific task, and it's no different when it comes to video games. Defeating Lawrence was, for the first time in a while, the only thing I strive to overcome in a video game because, holy mother of cost, this guy was tough for me. I started at around, I would say 8 p.m. around that time, and I didn't defeat Lawrence until exactly 1:01 a.m. in the morning. And boy was I exhausted but determined in those 5 hours. You can imagine the amount of excitement and sudden energy I had at 1 in the morning once I killed him. But of course I couldn't dispel it as expressively as I wanted to, so I just whispered yes while pumping my fist in the air multiple times until I was satisfied with myself. But man, did it feel so great. The reason for Lawrence being so hard for me was the fire effects added onto his regular attacks, which were really difficult for me to predict and to dodge. You would think I would have learned about this pattern around 2 hours. No, it took me 5. The Cleric Beast was so easy, but when you add fire to him, I can't comprehend what he's doing. Now, of course, Lawrence has his own attacks, but you get my point. As you can see, my health is significantly high, but Lawrence has some powerful attacks that, with the fire effect added on, can take away half my health in an instant. Especially this one-handed ground pound that causes a huge explosion. It's a problem I have to face. But after a while, I figured out his patterns really well, and I was doing really good, until he hit 50% and decided to lose the lower half of his body. Now at this point I thought, oh, I'll just get behind him like any other big monster. But not only does he have attacks that do a 180 swipe, he is constantly pouring out lava from his intestines. Then I thought he'll be sluggish since he lost his legs, but then he started to army crawl his way towards me that did an insane amount of damage with every hit, and of course he left a huge trail of lava behind him. And sometimes he just pukes lava from both ends that just decimates my health, which is nice. Lawrence was a huge challenge, but the key that I found to this fight, like I did with Vicar Emilia, was patience. You have to be very picky with the shots you decide to take, and you have to come to terms that every good run with him will take time. In his first phase, I would hit him a couple times, dodge his attacks, rinse and repeat. Whenever I staggered him, I shoved my weapon up whatever orifice I could find and then ran away to reset. The second phase, not gonna lie, I needed a bit of luck. At this point, when I had fought him so many times at around 12:30, I just knew when to dodge and I figured out this little trick, right? When Lawrence does his crawl attack, if you can position yourself just right, he will rampage around your character, leaving you time to hit him quite a few times. This little trick, combined with complete focus and fast reflexes, Lawrence was defeated, and I felt so empowered. It was thrilling to hear his theme playing in the background as I landed the last few hits, and I have to say, what a beautiful and epic soundtrack. I can't get over how amazing the soundtrack in this game is. I have to say, probably one of the best soundtracks in Bloodborne for me. Even after 5 hours, it was not boring to listen to. And just to kind of change gears, I hate to admit it, but my first time playing through, I didn't have as much trouble as other players did. When I say that I struggled, it took me around a maximum of 5 tries for some of the bosses in this game. And then I see clips of other players taking around double or even triple the amount of time of attempts to defeat those bosses. I'm a really fast learner, so I can easily modify and adjust my preferred playstyle, which is really aggressive, to suit better whatever enemy I'm going against so that I come out victorious. However, Lawrence was a true test of my capabilities and figuring out a strategy for a tough opponent. And finally defeating him for the first time was one of my best moments in the DLC and overall in Bloodborne.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
My true mentor, my guiding moonlight.
The first boss in the DLC, and one of the toughest bosses in Bloodborne. Of course Ludwig would be on this list. Ludwig is also known as the first hunter of the Healing Church, and the leader of a group of hunters known as the Holy Blades, hence why he's also known as Ludwig the Holy Blade. He's trained other hunters of the church and even fellow Yharnamites to fight off the beasts, and Ludwig was considered a hero in Yharnam. But sadly, Ludwig could only fight off his lust for blood for so long and transformed into the hideous beast we all love to fight. This was such a complex and gruesome battle, but so much fun at the same time. On really good runs, I'm not gonna lie, I was cheering and motivating myself to stay calm and that I could win because he was and still is very difficult. Ludwig's aggressive behavior along with his unpredictable nature is a test of skill and perseverance that pushed me over my limitations. I felt like I was going Ultra Instinct at some points because my dodges were on point when I learned his attack pattern. The accursed form of Ludwig is a terror to go against because he has such a large hitbox and heavy attacks that easily left me with a small chunk of my health. The social cues Ludwig gives before his bigger attacks, like his scream before the charge or the massive leap before the body slam, really helped me out, but it was a more of getting the timing down of when to dodge. For example, when Ludwig jumps into the air, there are 2 blood drips that happen, a 1-second pause, and then he'll come crashing down. What I usually do is I run in a straight line and then I jump right before he lands, which works a majority of the time. Besides that, the first phase was not so much trouble for me because my aggressive dodging playstyle works really well with him since I found out that the best position is right underneath him. The second phase is around, I would say, the same difficulty, at least for me. It has certain strengths that the other stage doesn't have, like a giant sword. What's funny is, in my first run with Ludwig, that the first phase gave me so much trouble, but the second was no problem. My second run, however, was the complete opposite, as I understood the first phase a lot better this time around. After fighting him twice now, both times taking around, I would say a couple of hours, it's really fun for me personally to become the quote-unquote unstoppable force. On my second run, I had his first phase down to every single detail of the fight where sometimes I would get hit once or twice, and it's not because I made a mistake, but it's because I wanted to get in a couple extra hits. I was so confident in my abilities at this point that he did not scare me at all. And the second phase is no different. His attack patterns I knew very well, and being able to dodge his infamous Holy Blade left and right, avoiding the instant death AoE Sword Slam, I felt like I was the boss of this area. Ludwig is the only boss in Bloodborne, as of right now, that I feel as though I have mastered exceptionally well. The other bosses on this list I can still potentially struggle with, but the aggressive way I play works beautifully with Ludwig, and I can't ignore that factor. Not to mention that as I abuse this unsightly beast, I'm listening to one of the best tracks in Bloodborne, and probably in video games that I've ever heard. The music in the first phase is almost, I would say, distorted, and really captures the downfall and insanity of Ludwig. Listen, the choir is so perfect for this fight. The second phase soundtrack just gets even better, somehow, and it turns into a more glorious tune. Ludwig's humanity is revived for this phase, so he picks up his sword and it is now you against the leader of the Holy Blades. And the music makes it all the more epic, and it really absorbed me into the fight. I love the music in both phases so much. It's truly Bloodborne's music at its best. What I like the most about Ludwig is the difference between his two phases. For example, the Shadows of Yharnam are still the shadows, just with snakes and new attacks. Lawrence the First Vicar is still Lawrence, just without legs. Ludwig himself is under the influence of blood, titling him the Accursed One, but once you literally beat some sense into him, he's reminded of who he was, pouring all his fears and worries into the blade and becoming the Ludwig he once was. What was a screaming, vile creature in the first phase transforms into the noble hunter he is at heart, and I love that 180 change halfway through the fight. Ludwig the Holy Blade is what I call the perfect boss fight, a balanced mix of lore, music, variety, and challenge that without a doubt influences my opinion as Bloodborne to be one of my favorite games.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
This was the toughest boss I have ever faced in my video game history. Like I said with Lawrence, something that you should know about me is that when I get stuck on something, I will not quit until I find a solution to my problem. Therefore, I was not going to leave Bloodborne until I defeated the Orphan of Kos. I told you about Lawrence. He took me 5 hours, from 8 to 1 AM. This boss took me 12 hours to beat for the first time, from 12 PM to 12 AM. Surprisingly though, I wasn't at all angry or annoyed. Even though I died more times than I can count, I was determined to beat the last boss of the DLC, even if it took me 12 hours, which it did. I mentioned that the other bosses on this list are very aggressive. I take that back. He was literally just birthed, and he's considered the toughest boss in Bloodborne because he does not stop attacking. It took me so long, not because of the insane amount of damage he did, but because he was literally raping me from multiple angles at the same time. And this was just the first phase. I didn't think the second phase would be 5 times more difficult than the first, but it was. He becomes bigger, grows wings, and grabs his placenta with both hands. And he proceeds to go absolutely crazy. In this form, he's able to produce lightning from his mother's corpse and can throw his placenta juice that explodes with insane range. And, get this, he's even more aggressive, flailing around his attacks that do an absurd amount of damage, jumping and slamming on my character, hopping around, attacking from different angles. It becomes almost too much to handle. Like, when I play 3 matches in For Honor and I don't do well, that's too much for me, and I stop. This guy, 12 hours, and I didn't stop. I seriously can't handle For Honor, I have a problem. And what I think is funny is that he fights like an actual toddler, grabbing whatever the biggest object they can and just aimlessly throwing it all over the place. of course while screaming at you. When I finally defeated the Orphan of Kos for the first time, I was so happy. I jumped and yelled with joy. Even though it was 12 a.m., it was the most satisfying feeling I've had in a video game ever, or at least in a while. I felt like a god. It was such a good feeling. Considering the 12 hours of him beating the crap out of me, it felt so good to see him fall. Now, the second time around, it was much easier. It took me around, I would say, an hour, or at least close to that. And it was my second attempt that I mastered the timing with the parrying. So first phase I had down to a science, right? He didn't even hit me sometimes, and when he did, I had a rune that healed 200 of my health, so it wasn't even that big of a deal. However, the second phase was still very difficult, which is why it still took me an hour to beat him. First phase, easy. But the second was much more difficult to parry, so I had to master dodging his attacks, and I could only get in a max of 2 hits before he went crazy again. But after knowing his attacks and understanding how the lightning works, finally, I took him down again. The Orphan of Kos is basically the boss of bosses, and heavily challenged every single technique in the game that I felt like I mastered completely when taking him down for the first time. Now, one thing I do want to mention is the irony of this fight. You've probably noticed, if you have fought the Orphan before, that the music in the first phase is actually really peaceful and not fast-paced at all. And hearing that in the background while this infant is charging constantly at you, I think it's kind of funny. And then the second phase theme upgrades to the speed of the fight, but honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a big fan of the music itself, but it really does add on to the tension. That has made me panic before, and I just died to his juicy placenta. Okay, I'll stop. Another thing that really intrigues me about this boss is the atmosphere within the area and right outside the fog where you enter. Seeing all these slug people worship the Orphan before I entered was honestly pretty creepy, and it makes sense considering he is the orphan of what the villagers call Mother Kos, which is a great one. Lady Maria is also trying to protect him from the other hunters, so he is technically a sacred artifact if you think about it that way. But when you do enter the arena to fight him, it's sort of bland, not in a bad way, but it's open for the purpose of having a lot of space to move. And seeing the sea in the background is kind of nice. But all in all, I love this fight. Mastering his attacks in different phases, as well as the satisfaction it gives, the lore, atmosphere, and music. The Orphan of Kos deserves to be the final boss in the DLC, but sadly, not the number 1 on my list. But hey, you made it pretty close, Orphan. So before we get into number 1, let's take a quick recap. Number 10, the Bloodstar Beast. Number 9, Father Gascoigne. Number 8, Vicar Emilia. Number 7, The Shadows of Yharnam. Number 6, Martyr Lugarius. Number 5, Gehrman, the First Hunter. Number 4, Lawrence, the First Vicar. Number 3, Ludwig the Accursed / the Holy Blade. And finally, at number 2, we have the Orphan of Kos. My favorite boss in Bloodborne, without a doubt, the Witches of Hemwick. Nah, I'm just kidding.
A corpse should be left well alone. From your wild curiosity.
This is my favorite boss in Bloodborne, obviously. I actually want to start off by talking about the lore behind Lady Maria because I find it captivating and I think it's necessary for her entry, and I'll try my best to keep it as brief as possible. Lady Maria is a former resident of Cainhurst, and also related to the queen herself, Annalise, of the Vile Bloods. She mastered the blood arts of the Cainhurst nobles, which was very powerful, but quickly disowned those techniques and retreated to Gehrman to train under his genius, which suited her more than the blood arts and became one of the first hunters of the church. Her notorious weapon is the Rakuyo, which complemented her quick combat style very well, but she actually abandoned the weapon in Fishing Hamlet because she was possibly regretful of what the church did to the fellow villagers, and wanted to redeem herself. She became the protector of the corpse of Cris and was the caretaker of the poor victims of the Healing Church's experiments in the research hall. Eventually, though this is only speculation, she committed suicide, as we can see the blood on her dress and the slit on her throat that indicate her possible cause of death, in which pulled her consciousness into the nightmare. A lot of what happened after Fishing Hamlet is speculation, but regardless, I love the lore behind Lady Maria, and it makes me appreciate the purity she tried to retain after assisting the Healing Church. As the caretaker of the really disgusting patients in the research hall and the Orphan of Cris, Lady Maria fights with pure skill and dexterity that cannot be easily matched. She is very nimble and quick like her lore implies, and almost half of her moves are personally very hard for me to parry because of how fast she moves. After a couple of tries, I eventually got her into phase 2, which she then starts to use her forbidden blood arts. I like how even though she despises the blood arts she once used, her determination to protect the Orphan of Cris is strong enough to overcome what she feels if it means to stop your wild curiosity. So now, along with her fast attacks, she gains a blood after effect that increases damage and range, which isn't so bad. I can manage the blood and her attacks fairly well, but of course if I make one wrong mistake, I'm in a lot of trouble. She then also gains a few new absolutely devastating attacks that are not incredibly hard to dodge, so it makes it fair, but one wrong move and she will take a huge margin of my health away. However, it's in phase 3 where the real show begins, because after phase 2 she now gains fire affinity on top of her blood arts, which makes for a really great performance in my opinion. The same attacks are even stronger, and even just one of her fatal blows can easily decimate my entire health bar, which, honestly, I'm okay with. The reason I don't mind the one-hit KO moves is because Lady Maria without them would be a little too easy. With those really strong moves in her arsenal, she is still a dangerous threat to me, so I still have to time my dodges perfectly, otherwise I have to do the entire fight again, which makes the battle like one huge adrenaline rush. This is one of the few bosses in the game where I like the fight to play out because her attacks just look so gorgeous. Seeing the blood and the blaze slice through the air with her graceful and precise attacks makes for a wonderful and incredible boss fight. She has beauty and fatality with every single attack in the third phase. It's almost like this isn't a duel, but rather a dance, dodging in between her blades, blood, and fire. It's the only fight in the game that I would categorize as graceful. Simply graceful. And what makes it even more beautiful is the music. I love Lady Maria's theme. It is my favorite soundtrack in Bloodborne, without a doubt. Especially because after understanding and reading about her lore, it's kind of like a reminiscence of her choices with the church and the despair she had to face and is facing now in the nightmare. Also, it's just an epic track. I mean, there's just no other track better than this. But regardless, Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower is without a doubt a majestic boss in Bloodborne that had a different atmosphere and fight that no other boss can provide. Along with the breathtaking music and her graceful charm, Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower is my favorite boss in Bloodborne. Wow. That was a long video. I want to let you guys know right now, my entire script is 17 pages. But, yeah, if you guys did stick to the end, I really appreciate you, like, a lot. I can't believe you actually stuck this long. Like, I personally enjoy really long videos, so I don't mind making them these long. I don't mind making my videos this long. But yeah, I hope you guys did enjoy this video, and I'm curious to see what are your favorite bosses in Bloodborne, so be sure to leave a comment, and be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. But until then, my friends, my name is Josh, also known as Gascoigne, and I'll see you in the next video.